So we're looking at mid layers and insulation in general, and as well as down, there's also synthetic fibers as well. One of the manufacturers of this insulation is Polartec, and for example, Polartec have one of their products. They've got hundreds of products, and that's the thing. You know, they make an insulation for every kind of sport and activity. But Alpha, this is Alpha insulation, which they call on the move warmth, and that means that, you know, it's a sort of, it regulates the temperature, it breathes really well, and it's perfect for alpine or ski touring, alpine skiing or ski touring. So insulation, synthetic insulation is, you know, obviously man-made fibers that are normally, certainly in this case, recycled materials. So for example, Polartec have already in their history recycled more than 1.3 billion plastic bottles. They claim to be the first to have started doing that. It's pretty impressive. So there are benefits to having synthetic materials in either a mid-layer garment, a standalone mid-layer garment, like a sort of fleecy jacket, or an insulated mid-layer garment, but also outerwear insulation. Someone like Polartec would work with an outer layer manufacturer, and put the Polartec fabric inside that garment. You might see a brand that you know really well, but actually you'll notice that there's a label on there that says Polartec as well, which is the insulation inside that jacket. So we've talked about Gore-Tex, we've talked about Dermazax, these outer fabrics, but here I've come along to the North Face stand. And North Face have just launched for this 2019 winter, they've launched a completely new, what they're calling revolutionary product called Futurelight. And Futurelight, the difference with Futurelight is that it uses nanotechnology in the membrane of the fabric. And what Futurelight allows is not just moisture vapor to evaporate through the fabric, but air as well. It's a really interesting development. I mean, obviously, it's brand new. It's won an ISPO award here this year in 2019. I'm looking forward to trying it out, but what North Face is saying is that it's even more breathable than other fabrics out there, equivalent fabrics, because they're using this nanotechnology that's never been used before. It's also highly waterproof as well. So it's going to be really interesting testing it out. It's a brand new fabric that's come onto the market this year. Is it the revolution? Is it a revolution in fabric technology? It looks like it could be. So we're looking at different types of insulation for ski and snowboard jackets. We've looked at down, we've looked at synthetic materials and different types and brands that do those things. But here we have a wool product. It's a wool insulation. Been wearing wool for centuries. This one is called Swiss wool. It's actually Autobox produced mid-layer jackets, and they use Swiss wool as an insulation quality. It's very warm, it's breathable, it doesn't get too affected in the wet, so it's a really good insulation for skiing, snowboarding, and even mountaineering. So inside there's a merino wool liner, but actually inside the actual jacket itself it's Swiss wool, which is basically wool from Swiss sheep. So it's another type of insulation. If you don't like down, or you don't want to use down and you want something more natural, then wool is an alternative to those other insulation materials. So we're talking about insulation here. Come on to the Primaloft stand. Primaloft is an insulation. It's been around since around the 1990s, and based in upstate New York, so it comes out of the United States. It's a polyester fiber that's spun into tiny little micro hairs, so even much thinner than, say, your own hair. And what that does, it creates some interesting qualities. First of all, Primaloft is really good in the wet conditions. Unlike down, which we know is a great insulator, but when it gets wet it doesn't perform as well. Primaloft is something that, as with the synthetic fibers, you can see it here, it has really good, almost like a waterproof quality in itself. So I've tipped the water up there, you can see it's not letting that water through. But even if it does get damp, it performs, it still insulates, and it still keeps you warm even when wet. So typically can be really good in a mid layer or as an insulator in a ski jacket. So underneath that shell, you might have a layer of Primaloft. It's a brand, it's their own brand, they have their own way of doing things, but it's a pretty neat product and it's very popular. A lot of brands are using it. Here, we have a typical example. It's a women's peak performance jacket, so you can see that's a ski jacket for the 2019 winter, but it's got the Primaloft insulation inside it. So that's Primaloft insulation, synthetic polyester fiber. It goes together with a whole range of other synthetic and natural insulation that we've been looking at. So we're talking about insulation here, and I've come along to the Thinsulate stand. I'd say the original synthetic insulation, about 40 years old, manufactured by 3M. 3M, American company, Minnesota mining manufacturers. So, massive, massive corporation. They came up with this Thinsulate synthetic fabric back in the 1980s. I remember I had my first ski jacket had Thinsulate in. It was the big thing, and it still is. It's a pretty amazing thing, and they've come up, this is the original one. It's a very, very light polyester style insulation. But they now do synthetic down as well. We've got that here. It feels so soft to the touch. It's lovely. And you know, these guys, they are engineers. That's their background. That's what they do. They're geeky engineers who have manufactured all sorts of different types of insulation for a lot of different purposes, but ski jackets is one of those.